Hello, this is Dan from The Plague. Welcome to another episode of Hidden Gems. This week we are going to be taking a look at a couple more records that we have decided to, shine a little bit of light on because they're ones that have kind of gone unnoticed or just underrated over the years, and we feel like they deserve more attention. So let me introduce Nels, who's going to be joining me. And
Hello.
so my choice for this week is actually going to be the Creator album Outcast. And the reason I've chosen this is, Creator's kind of gone through like three phases. Like they had like their really classic albums from Endless Pain up through Como Souls. And those were like, you could really hear like the progression from each album to the next. And they were all like really solid albums. And then in the 90s, they kind of decided to go in a more experimental direction. And I think a lot of people were really divided about how Renewal sounded because it started introducing some more industrial elements. It wasn't necessarily as fast as some of the earlier albums, and the production on it was very weird, just to be kind. So Outcast to me though is like the album that's like, it's not the most hated one. That's usually either Renewal or Endorama, but it's the one that kind of gets overlooked because it was kind of right in the middle of the 90s. And to me, it's like one of their best albums. Like it's just like front to back, like just really solid songs. It's the best production they had on any of the 90s albums. And it's kind of a more mid-tempo album, but the songs themselves are just really strong. Like there's just some great riffs throughout. So this was actually also the return of Venter to the drum kit because he actually left after Renewal, and they had the drummer from Whiplash for that one album, Cause for Conflict. And it makes a big difference to me. Like, I think if you listen to Cause for Conflict, like the drumming is it's really fast and like a lot of double bass, but it just doesn't really fit the band's style very well. And then there's something just with the mix and the recording on that album that didn't really work for me. But with Venter coming back into the band, you just have that like really solid, like his drumming just like really fits with the types of riffs that Millet writes, I think, like perfectly. And it was also still when they were kind of experimenting with industrial elements because there's some like kind of sampled percussion bits throughout the album. And they also use a lot of, well, not a lot, but like some distorted vocals, like on some of the choruses here and there. It's also interesting. It's also where Millet's voice, his vocal style, you kind of see where they're going to go with Endorama because there's some songs where he does that kind of like clean singing. That's almost like talking more than singing because I don't think he's like real comfortable as a singer. But yeah, they really developed that more in Endorama, which was just like, a more like melodic and commercial, I guess, version of Outkast, but it's still a really good album and another album that I think deserves. That was actually one I was thinking about doing too for this, but
Yeah,
it's almost too obvious because it's like the one that it's probably the least Creator sounding album. But yeah, there's a lot of surprisingly catchy songs in this album too. You have like Enemy Unseen and Leave This World Behind and Against the Rest.
Phobia.
And Phobia. Yeah, the one song that's like, I think remained in their set list like ever since this album came out, or at least like majority of the shows they play.
I love that song.
It's a killer song. And like I said, I think the whole album is really strong. I mean, there's a couple of forgettable tracks, later on. You have like Ruin of Life and Alive Again that are just kind of like, they're okay, but they don't really stick in your mind. But I think as a whole, like it's just a really strong album. And like I said earlier, the production, it's done by Vincent Voino, who also did a lot of work with like Bay Area bands, like mixing and engineering.
Right.
He also produced a couple Trouble albums, United, he worked with them.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so he did a lot of different work. And as much as I didn't like his production on Cause for Conflict, I think his work on this album was like just perfect. Like it really delivered the heaviness of the material, and yeah, the drums just sound great too, which is I think another big thing with to me at least, how good an album sounds is like, you really have to have a good drum sound as a foundation.
Right.
So yeah, that's my take for Outcast. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that one.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's to me, it's one of their standouts. Just the riffs on it are super catchy. The mix, the way they tend to, like Phobia is a good example. It starts with just that riff just by itself, and then the mix kicks in with all the instruments. All of it sounds really good. The songs are really catchy. I think the riffs are super strong. And yeah, to me, it's a great Creator album. And I think we had discussed how the initial issue CD, one of the songs is just messed up on it. It's like somewhere during the mastering, they corrupted one of the files or something, and it's got this bizarre, like part of another song that from another band plays over the top of it, unless it's some really avant-garde songwriting, which I don't think it is. But honestly, whenever I go to listen to that CD, that's what I think of immediately before I even think of how good the rest of the music is. And I almost kind of wonder if that didn't have some impact on how fondly that CD is remembered, even though the rest of the music is all just like top-notch Creator. And I completely agree about the drums just being perfect. Just right for that sound, just going perfectly with those riffs and they're really good Millie classic riffs,
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely love that album.
I like too that they still use some of that like the industrial influence from Renewal, but it's very subtle. Like it's not like it's not like, oh, we're going to be Ministry now or something. It's just like just enough to like give it a little bit of an edge, but not detract from the songs themselves. I mean, it's still definitely a heavy, mid-tempo thrash album.
Yeah,
it's hard. So
right, and it's interesting too that Creator went through this phase of being really experimental and doing kind of different things. And as much as I still love the band and love all their albums, that have come out, they are one of those bands that I think has fallen into kind of, we know how to make our albums, we know how to record them, and most of their more recent albums could just be continuations of each other. It doesn't seem like there's that much variance, and that's one thing that I think I give bands a lot of credit for trying slightly different things, trying to break the mold a little bit, and it's really cool that they went through this process. I think they could do with some more of that at this point, and probably will, knowing how those guys work. Yeah,
and the 90s were just like so brutal for a lot of bands. Like they were either just lost their popularity, they branched out into different, like Metallica, like, oh, we're going to go completely in a different direction. And
it can be really destructive to a band and to their fan base to go too far in some new direction. So I think that's definitely a reason that a lot of bands don't do that as much. And I think it's really brave and admirable when bands do it and they're successful at it,
Right. Yeah. And like, I was just thinking as I was reviewing their albums, it's like, I can't think of a bad Creator album. Like, I don't think they've ever done a poor album. Like,
yeah, same.
To me, like even Cause for Conflict, like the first couple, when they kind of went back to their old sound, Violent Revolution and Enemy of God, those I think get a lot more credit than they deserve, because like the songs on them are like they're not that memorable. Like they're good, but they're like, but yeah, even those albums I really enjoy, and all the later ones have been, like you said, they've kind of found that formula that works for them.
Yeah, and it does work. I mean, all credit to them. It's from the mixing to the recording to the production to the riffs and the song construction. They've got it down pat. I mean, every time you get a Creator album these days, you know what to expect. It's going to be good.
And they've got such a back catalog now of like classic stuff that they could just, tour on that forever and not even worry about it. But they're still putting like, they put effort into their new albums. They don't just like churn them out every year. So
yeah, I get the impression that Millie is, I mean, he's an actual real artist. The guy, he is way into his craft, and I think it shows. He's gotten extremely good at what he does. His singing may not be for everybody, but
it is unique.
It is unique. And hey, that's another thing that I really like about in vocalists in particular, people that are unique, that have different sounds to their voices, and which again might be kind of risky, but and it might take a while to grow on you, but I think eventually that's a really good characteristic to have.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you have like Tom Araya, who's like, you know, he tried doing more like conventional singing at times, and that's not the greatest either, but like he's got such a unique, powerful voice that
yeah, I think back to the classic days of like the Scorpions and Klaus, and just having a vocalist that didn't sound like every other vocalist. And yeah, I think that's a real standout thing these days. Man, there's so many harsh metal singers that are clones of each other.
Yeah, so speaking of vocalists that are really talented and stand out from each other, we can roll into your choice for this week.
Yeah, good point. So my choice is E-Z-O, Fire Fire. And this is the alternate cover. I guess there's another cover that's just black with E-Z-O, Fire Fire on it. This is their 1989 album. It's technically the band's second album, though I believe they had 3 albums before this as Flatbacker. And you know, the album previous to this, they changed their name to E-Z-O, and apparently that was at the behest of Gene Simmons, who was really involved with the band during their first album as E-Z-O. I believe he even produced it. And I believe E-Z-O, their name is actually it looks like an acronym. It's all capitals, but the word E-Z-O in Japanese, I believe, is a reference to the people that inhabit the northern area of Japan, those northern islands. They are the E-Z-O, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but so that's, I think, where it came from originally. But yeah, so this album, it follows up on their really strong debut as well. A really good album there. And the interesting thing to me about E-Z-O is, at the time, I remember them just like getting a ton of MTV exposure. It's like, oh my God, here's this Japanese band, and they're really breaking. They're like, finally, there's, I feel like there's a ton of really good Japanese bands that have a hard time breaking in the West for some reason. I've never really understood that. And these guys seem like they were breaking that mold. Like they were just everywhere all the time with this album. And then right after this, they kind of broke up. It's like, it's kind of weird. The singer, Masaki Yamada, went on to be the vocalist for Loudness. The bass player, the drummer, Hiro, he eventually became the drummer for Loudness for a while. And then he became the drummer for another great Japanese band, Anthem, for a number of years. Cool. But otherwise, yeah, I guess that's what kind of tore this band apart, which is sad because this is such a strong album. It would have been awesome to see more from these guys. And for me, this album really stands out because I was trying to, when I was researching and looking back at this, I was trying to come up with, how do you classify this music? Their image is surely glam. They have a very glam metal image. But it's interesting, there was a time when glam was just an image. It didn't necessarily mean you were going to play really wimpy, watered down metal, like glam metal, in my opinion, became. And I think that in Japan in particular, image is super important and doesn't necessarily dictate what the music's actually going to sound like. So for me, this is a really heavy album. It's not, speed metal or death metal or anything like that. And it is much more commercial, but it's just really good, really heavy, really well put together songs, really great riffs. The guitar player, Shoyo Aida, I'm hopefully pronouncing that correctly, just standout riffs, which I assume that he wrote. It's really, the production is really it's really like stripped down. You feel like there's only one guitar. There's only, there's not a ton of reverb, and there's not a lot of stuff going on. It's really clear and concise, really super strong riffs. And again, getting back to the vocalist, that guy's one of my favorite vocalists of all time. Has a very, very powerful, very unique vocal style. And really, I think that and the arrangements and the songwriting, I think, are what make this album really stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember at the time, like, that album came out, I loved the first album.
Yeah, the first album was really good.
And I can't even remember how I know you bought the first album. I'm not sure how you heard about it, but then I heard it from you.
Yeah, I think maybe I was working at the Record Garden at that point. I don't remember, but I have the first album on vinyl only. I really need to get it on CD, but it has become difficult to find. Actually, this one even is difficult to find, at least over here. Not so much in Japan.
Right.
Strangely enough. It's always, that's one thing that, especially in this modern age when everything is so accessible to everybody, I find it weird that there's these completely separate scenes. Japan has this incredible, vibrant metal scene. And again, they tend to have some incredible takes on image and things like that. You have just these wild looking bands, the Rosenfelds of the world. And you never know just by looking at the band what they're going to actually sound like. There's the whole visual KI or Ki or however it is, that's sort of a steampunk meets pirate meets something else. Almost very, very glammy, but very, very stylized look. And some of those bands are just fantastic. But it always has amazed me that scene just exists kind of in Japan, and it isn't just like super globally well known or even sometimes available. Obviously, streaming services make that a lot easier to deal with and more accessible. But yeah, so anyway, I definitely need to get their first album on CD just for just to have it. But yeah, I think I bought it on record, and I think I think I just ran into it at the Record Garden. The guy I worked for, Mike McAdams, was a huge fan of all the Japanese stuff, and so he tended to stock a lot of it. We may have even had the first album as a Japanese import. I can't remember, but yeah, a lot of that stuff came through the door, and it was like, well, I don't know how this is going to sound. I'll just take a chance on it and buy it. And that may have been the case with the first E-Z-O album.
Yeah, the second album, when it came out, like, for some reason I just kind of wrote it off as like more commercial and just not as interesting. And I think it's partially because of some of the song titles. You've got like the what's them down here. Oh geez, She's Riding the Rhythm,
Right,
Streetwalker, Wild Talk or something.
Talk, yeah, right.
And it just seemed like kind of that typical LA glam sort of song titles, and I think that just kind of threw me off. And then like the first song on the album, which is actually a really good song, but it's got like a big chorus to it that's kind of like this big sing-along chorus, and I just didn't give it the chance at the time. And then it wasn't until like the late 90s and early 2000s that I went back and I found a copy on CD and was like, holy crap, this album is amazing. And
really good. Yeah, the songs are really well put together. And, the lyrics, like you said, that you never know with a Japanese band, do they speak English? Do they speak it well enough that they're willing to write lyrics? I believe almost all, if not all, almost all of the lyrics on this album are in English. So you never know, did the band come up with those? Did the producer help write them? I can't remember if they're credited as being co-written or something. I think they're actually really good. Like, despite the fact that there's definitely some, like you said, titles like Wild Talk and things like that. There's also the song Fire Fire itself, which is just well put together. The lyrics to it are pretty cool. They're about nuclear destruction and the end of the world, which is always
Awesome.
good. And actually, seeing this band live, I believe the vocalist did speak really good English, if I recall correctly. So potentially he did write the lyrics. I'm not sure.
I noticed there was a guy named Jody Gray who is credited as co-writing a lot of the songs on there.
That could be. And so Jody Gray is credited also as one of the associate producers on the album, and I think Stefan Galfas is also credited on at least one of the songs, and he's the actual main producer and mixer. And I'm not super familiar with either of those guys, but I think the way this album sounds and the way it's put together is pretty good. It's like somebody behind the scenes mixing and arranging and whatever else, whether influence they had as a producer, an associate producer, did a really good job. It does kind of feel a little bit put together though, but they did a really good job at it. So I don't think that's a bad thing. And it definitely, to me, makes the songs come across as very catchy, memorable. And I think you're right about at first take it might not have impressed me as much, but it's definitely one of those ones that as I listened to it more, I got more into the songs and they became more memorable.
Yeah, and I mean, part of the problem was that I loved the first album so much. Like it's like part of my DNA. Like I've heard it so many times, but
yeah, first album is really, really good.
But it's cool too because now I have this album that I can go to that's like more fresh sounding. It's like, oh, this is like, because I don't know it as by heart as much, so it's
right.
It's really cool. It's interesting you mentioned Stefan Galfas, the producer, because I looked him up and his work is like you'd expect this album to sound way more commercial.
Yeah, he's worked with a vast array of people. I looked that up as well.
And he
Cher and some other people, I believe.
Yeah, and he did like the albums that were like he did Fight for the Rock, the Sabotage album that like went totally wrong.
Right.
He did Saxon's Destiny, which was another one that was like, okay, we're trying to be commercial and appeal to an American audience.
Yeah.
Onslaught's In Search of Sanity, which is a great album, but again, the production's very like too clinical and very clean. And somehow like Fire actually doesn't suffer from those problems. Like it actually got an edge to it, but it's still like clean and punchy enough that it really works. So
yeah. I completely agree. It has that feel where you're like, oh, this is really put together. And usually that means, and it's not very good.
Right.
You can notice how like crafted the mix and crafted the production are. Sometimes that's not a good thing. But on this album, it totally works. It's like, that's one of the strong points of this. And I think it's because everything is so clean. It's like, like I said, it usually feels like there's one guitar and, everything is kind of really separate. The mix isn't like super heavy mixed together. It's not really dry per se, but everything stands out individually really well. The solos come through really well. They're really interesting solos too. Mm-hmm. I would really like to see more from this guitar player, in fact, but I don't know of anything else that he has done.
It's interesting too because the production on the first album was kind of similar. Like, Gene Simmons, he actually did a really good job on that, and it's like you can really hear the different instruments, and everything sounds like, but it still sounds very upfront and all drenched in reverb, like a lot of late '80s albums were.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason why people got a bad impression of synthesizers back in those days too, because it tended to be they would just pile on a bunch of synths and kind of bury the guitars, and everything would get kind of blended together and have this real smooth sound. And you hear people say, oh yeah, I don't like overproduced albums. I'm like, well, you don't like badly produced albums. An album that is really well produced and is crafted really well, it helps it a lot. And I like this album for sure. Yeah, it's funny too, mentioning Gene Simmons, the band, certainly back in the Flatbacker days and a little bit on the first album, and especially the singer had kind of a makeup thing that he would do. And I always wondered if that was, you know, and obviously, and then there's a Gene Simmons involvement as well. If there was anything there, it's like, but they pretty much ditched that whole thing for this album. At least, you know, like the cover has no makeup at all, and the shot on the back has no makeup at all. So kind of interesting.
I could almost see it being like somebody told Gene Simmons about this Japanese band that were using makeup, and he tried to decide if he could sue them, and found out he couldn't for whatever reason, and then decided to work with them instead.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. It's funny how, again, with the image stuff, you know, if you watch a lot of Japanese metal, you will see everything in every different style of music, you know, stuff that you just wouldn't see over here. Although, you know, in Europe and a lot of like, we have the corpse paint and stuff like that. So there's some crossover there, I guess. But, you know, I think of bands like Jurassic Jade in Japan. Certainly there's a ton of those visual KI or that whole genre that have wild makeup, wild hair, costumes, but you just never know what the actual music's going to sound like. And often it's amazingly technically proficient.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting how like the whole image of bands has really evolved in recent years. Like you said, there's a lot of different styles in the European metal scene too. You get like a lot of these like kind of Viking metal or whatever that have like the face paint and like not necessarily corpse paint, but just like, you know, weird like battle paint and outfits and whatnot. But it's kind of cool. I mean, I think it's, you know, more power to them. It's
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's actually becoming a lot more of a thing now that you say that. And every once in a while, you'll see a band still to this day. And I can't remember what band it was, but there was a very, very thrash band a few years back that the whole band looked like Mick Mars clones. They had, you know, big black hair and really extreme Mick Mars style white paint, but they sounded like total thrash, you know. And I think that's cool. You know, appropriate some of that stuff that maybe wasn't common for the genre and use it if you want to. It's pretty neat. I mean, hey, it's worked for King Diamond all these years.
Yeah, no kidding.
I always used to think that was totally weird. It's like, here's this band, Merciful Fate. They're not a makeup band. Nobody else in the band wears makeup. And here's this guy with this like almost Kiss style makeup. But over the years, man, that has become a beloved trademark. And I don't know, it's pretty cool. Do something different.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about like their sound too being kind of hard to pinpoint. Like I was kind of reminded a little bit of the Scorpions at times, because it's just some of the way that some of their guitar riffs sound.
Right. Like then also like heavier, slower type of. I mean, they're definitely not a super fast paced band.
They can be. There's always like one song. It's like Desiree on the first album, and then God, what's the one on this one? That's like really kind of upbeat. Black Moon.
Yeah.
One.
Yeah.
But
it's definitely heavy, though. I mean, it's I don't want to make it out like it's something it's not. It's definitely a very commercial album in that way, but it's commercial in a heavy way, you know.
Right. Yeah, like early Motley Crue or.
Oh my God! Yeah, look, exactly. There's a great example, and you know, I don't want to slag anybody, but some of those bands that, you know, the Warrants and the Poisons of the world, that they came along and their sound was very, very commercial and lightened up, and they had the wild glam image, and that just became what that was. And that's, to me, that's not what this is at all. And it's interesting, again, at how, man, at the time, these guys were super popular. At least that was my impression. Probably mostly from watching MTV, right?
Yeah.
But they were everywhere at some point. It was just like, oh my God, E-Z-O, you know? I think there's even a cameo appearance of the singer in the Testament Over the Wall video.
Really?
Yeah, there's a part where they're looking in the jail cells in Alcatraz, and one of the guys that's standing there, I believe, is Masaki Yamada. But yeah, for a while they were everywhere. It seemed like, oh, these guys have broken they're in the West, right? And then poof, they just disappeared.
I know, that was so bizarre, and I don't know if it was because he got the job with Loudness, and that's what like led to him breaking up, or if they were just breaking up anyways.
Yeah, I would love to know a lot more about that. And you know, the stuff he did with Loudness is, as we have just recently reviewed, is really good. He doesn't change his style. It fits in really well with Loudness. I believe there's 4 albums with him on them.
I forget, but yeah.
Of which I believe I only have one. Again, there's so many great Japanese albums that if you're into collecting physical media and listening to your music that way, over here in the West, it's just difficult to get. I don't know why.
It's amazing how many albums came out like in the 90s from these bands that I knew of from the 80s, like Anthem and Loudness and stuff, that just never made it across the ocean. And even now it's hard to find them. But yeah, you mentioned streaming. Like I actually have been finding at least some of like the Loudness and that Casbah album that you mentioned.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Just
awesome stuff.
Spotify. So it's cool that there's at least starting to get some of that stuff over here.
Yeah. The other thing that I find kind of shocking or funny about that is half the time when you actually do finally pick up one of those albums and you look at the back, it's recorded in San Francisco, or it's recorded, you know, in London, or it's recorded in LA, and all the people on the production list are Europeans or Americans. They're like, well, okay, you came over here and you recorded it, then you never. I mean, you know, the record label, of course, wants to spend their marketing dollars in a market where they feel like they're going to have success. But I just feel like so many of those bands, if they had just pushed harder in the West, could easily have found an audience. Maybe I'm wrong, but I always have felt that way.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think a lot of those, even like the 90s Loudness albums, they were still singing in English.
And exactly. A lot of these albums that are Japan only, the vocals are half or more in English.
You know, yeah, ever since what's the really popular German band that sings in German?
Oh, Rammstein, yeah.
Yeah, ever since they made it like this worldwide success singing in a non-English language, it's like, I don't know why people can't just accept any language.
Oh,
you know?
I love it when a band from wherever sings in their native language. I'm not going to understand it, obviously, most of the time.
Yeah.
There are a few exceptions, but I think that's cool. I really like that. Yeah, it's interesting with Rammstein. You know, they had that big breakout with Du Hast, and they recorded an English version of that, but that's not the version that became popular. You know.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's like no excuse.
No excuse at all. 50% in your own language at least, and if you're an American band, you must sing in Japanese and German.
Look at the Norwegian black metal bands; they all sing in Norwegian and.
Oh, I think that's awesome. Yeah.
You don't get any bigger than that as far as underground.
At the same time, you know, there's a lot of bands that do sing in English that do a really good job of it, even if they aren't native English speakers. I think that sounds great too. I like all the variety.
All right. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and go check out the KREATOR and E-Z-O albums.
Absolutely.
We will hope you'll be back in May for another one of these, and hope you join us. Until then, take care.